October 30th, 1942. 2140 hours. Mediterranean Sea, 70 miles off the Egyptian coast. Lieutenant Anthony Tony Fasson, first lieutenant aboard HMS Petard, stood on the destroyer's deck, watching the crippled U-559 wallow in the swells, seacocks open, water pouring into her pressure hull. The German submarine had surfaced after 16 hours of relentless depth charging, a coordinated attack by 4 Royal Navy destroyers, 2 escort vessels, and RAF patrol aircraft. U-559's crew scrambled overboard in panic, abandoning ship without following standard protocol. In their haste to escape the sinking vessel, they had failed to destroy something that would prove more valuable than the submarine itself. Fasson, a 29-year-old career officer with extensive naval intelligence training, understood immediately what this meant. German crews were trained to scuttle cryptographic materials before abandoning ship. Always. The fact that men were jumping into the Mediterranean without first triggering scuttling charges suggested catastrophic confusion aboard the U-boat, which meant one thing: the Enigma machine and codebooks might still be intact. For 10 months, Bletchley Park had been locked out of German U-boat communications. In February 1942, the Kriegsmarine had introduced a new four-rotor Enigma variant for Atlantic U-boat operations, codenamed Shark by British cryptanalysts. The blackout was absolute. Allied convoy losses had skyrocketed. Ships carrying men, fuel, ammunition, and food to Britain were being torpedoed in numbers that threatened to strangle the island nation. Intelligence that had once allowed convoys to rout around wolf packs had vanished overnight. Fasson knew that somewhere inside that flooding submarine were documents that could end the blackout: weather-short signal codebooks, current key settings, perhaps even the machine itself with its fourth-rotor configuration, material that would give Bletchley Park the cribs they desperately needed to break back into Shark. The U-559 was sinking. Slowly, but inevitably. Water was flooding through open valves, pulling her down meter by meter. Royal Navy standing orders were explicit: never board an enemy submarine. The risk of booby traps, sudden sinking, or delayed scuttling charges made it suicide. Fasson looked at able seaman Colin Grazier and 16-year-old NAFI canteen assistant Tommy Brown. Both men understood what he was thinking. Without a word, they began stripping off their shoes. What happened in the next 17 minutes aboard U-559 would alter the course of the Battle of the Atlantic and save thousands of Allied lives. But 2 of these 3 men would never surface again. Fasson, Grazier, and Brown dove into the cold Mediterranean and swam the 30 meters to U-559's listing hull. Seawater poured through the conning tower hatch in a steady cascade. The submarine's deck was already half submerged, waves washing over the forward casing. They had minutes, perhaps less. Fasson descended first through the conning tower. Complete darkness. The U-boat's emergency lighting had failed. Water was knee-deep in the control room, rising steadily. The smell of diesel fuel, battery acid, and seawater mixed in the confined space. Temperature was approximately 15 degrees Celsius, cold enough for hypothermia to become a factor within an hour. Grazier followed him down. Brown remained topside in the conning tower, positioned to relay materials up to men waiting in a whaler alongside the submarine. The system was improvised but efficient. Fasson and Grazier would locate documents, pass them to Brown, who would hand them to sailors in the boat. Working by touch in absolute darkness, Fasson's training directed him to the captain's cabin and the radio room, standard locations for cryptographic materials. His hands found what he was searching for almost immediately: the Wetterkurzschlüssel, the weather-short signal codebook. Waterproofed covers, approximately 15 centimeters by 20 centimeters, bound in red canvas. He passed it to Grazier, who passed it to Brown. The water was now waist-deep. The submarine's angle increased perceptibly, bow tilting downward. Fasson knew they had crossed the point of no return. Once water reached the forward torpedo room, the U-559 would plunge to the bottom in seconds. But he kept searching. His hands found a second volume, the Kurzsignalheft, the short signal codebook used for rapid tactical communications between U-boats. This document was gold. It contained the abbreviated code phrases that allowed submarines to report convoy positions, attack outcomes, and rendezvous coordinates in compressed transmissions. Bletchley Park had been blind to these messages since February. The codebook went up the chain. Grazier, searching the radio room separately, located the current Enigma key sheets, the monthly settings that determined rotor positions, ring settings and plugboard configurations for the U-boat network. These papers, valid through November 1942, would give cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park direct access to shark cipher settings. No guessing, no statistical analysis, just read and decrypt. The water reached chest level. Both men were shivering uncontrollably now, early stages of hypothermia setting in. Brown, watching from the conning tower, shouted down a warning, "She's going, get out!" But Fasson and Grazier went deeper into the submarine. They knew the Enigma M4 machine itself was still aboard, likely in the radio room. Capturing an intact four-rotor machine would be the ultimate prize, allowing British engineers to examine the fourth rotor mechanism that had made Shark unbreakable. Fasson found it. The Enigma M4, approximately 34 centimeters wide, 28 centimeters deep, weighing 12 kilograms, 4 rotors instead of 3. The machine that had blinded British naval intelligence for 10 months was in his hands. He began passing it up toward the conning tower. The U-559 lurched violently. The bow dropped another 15 degrees. Water surged through the forward bulkheads. From topside, British sailors were screaming for them to evacuate. The submarine was entering its final moments. Brown, positioned in the conning tower, received the Enigma machine and passed it up to the whaler. He scrambled out onto the deck just as the U-559's angle reached critical. He dove into the Mediterranean and swam clear. Fasson and Grazier were still inside. Witnesses in the whaler reported seeing both men attempt to reach the conning tower ladder. The water was neck-deep now, the current pulling them backward as thousands of liters flooded through open valves. At 2157 hours, 17 minutes after Fasson first entered the submarine, U-559 sank like a stone. Survivors in the water reported it took less than 8 seconds from final plunge to complete disappearance. The pressure hull crushed at approximately 200 meters depth. Tony Fasson and Colin Grazier went down with her. 7 German crew members had already died during the depth charge attack. Now 2 British sailors joined them, 9 men dead. But the materials they recovered, 3 codebooks and an Enigma M4 machine, were already en route to Bletchley Park. Before we continue with what happened to those captured materials, I want to hear from you. What's the most surprising WWII technology you've learned about? Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And if you're finding this technical analysis fascinating, hit that like button. It helps more history enthusiasts discover these stories. HMS Petard's commander, Commander Mark Thornton, understood immediately what his men had died retrieving. The waterproof document cases and Enigma machine were brought aboard at 22:10 hours, 13 minutes after U-559 disappeared beneath the waves. Thornton ordered them locked in his cabin under armed guard. No one was to examine them. No one was to photograph them, and critically, no one was to mention them in personal correspondence. The 38 German survivors from U-559, including Commander Hans Heitmann, were below decks in the destroyer's holding compartments. They had watched the boarding action from their lifeboats. They had seen British sailors carrying materials from their submarine to the whaler. Thornton's immediate concern was ensuring the Germans didn't realize exactly what had been captured. At 0300 hours on October 31st, Thornton composed his preliminary action report to Mediterranean Fleet Headquarters in Alexandria. The message was transmitted via encrypted naval cipher, not the same system as Enigma, but secure enough for operational communications. The text was brief. U-559, sunk position, 3147N, 3324E. Materials recovered before sinking. 2 crew lost. Request immediate intelligence liaison upon arrival Alexandria. The phrase materials recovered was deliberately vague. Even in encrypted naval communications, Thornton avoided specifying what had been captured. German intelligence monitored British radio traffic. If they detected unusual patterns, urgent messages about document recovery, references to cryptographic materials, they might suspect Enigma had been compromised and change their systems immediately. HMS Petard arrived at Alexandria at 1400 hours on October 31st. Waiting at the dock was Commander Ian Fleming. Yes, that Ian Fleming, the future author of James Bond novels, then serving as personal assistant to the Director of Naval Intelligence. Fleming had been alerted by Mediterranean Fleet Intelligence that sensitive materials of cryptographic nature had been recovered from an enemy submarine. His orders were explicit: secure the materials, catalogue them personally, and arrange immediate air transport to Britain. Fleming boarded Petard and went directly to Thornton's cabin. What he found exceeded expectations. The Wetterkurzschlüssel was intact, all pages legible despite seawater damage. The Kurzsignalheft showed water staining but was readable. The Enigma key sheets, protected by their waterproof covers, were in excellent condition, and the M4 Enigma machine itself, though damaged by seawater corrosion, was structurally complete. All four rotors were present. The plugboard was intact. The internal wiring could be examined. Fleming spent 3 hours cataloguing the materials and photographing each page of the codebooks. He used a Leica camera with a macro lens, producing multiple exposures of each document to ensure readability. These photographs would serve as backup in case the originals were lost in transit. By 1700 hours, Fleming had completed his work. The materials were repackaged in sealed leather cases and marked with innocuous labels: medical supplies, priority transport to London. The deception was deliberate. German intelligence agents operated throughout Egypt, including in Alexandria. If they learned that captured U-boat materials were being rushed to Britain, suspicions would rise. But medical supplies? Routine. Unremarkable. Fleming arranged air transport via RAF Transport Command. A Wellington bomber, scheduled for a routine supply flight to Gibraltar, would carry the cases. From Gibraltar, a Sunderland flying boat would continue to Britain, landing at Pembroke Dock in Wales. From there, a car would transport the materials directly to Bletchley Park, approximately 320 kilometers, a 6-hour drive. The journey began on November 1st. The Wellington departed Alexandria at 800 hours, arriving Gibraltar at 1630 hours after a refueling stop in Malta. The Sunderland departed Gibraltar at 600 hours on November 2nd, arriving Pembroke Dock at 1245 hours. A naval intelligence courier, Commander Edward Travis, who would later become director of GCHQ, met the aircraft personally and drove the materials to Bletchley Park, arriving at 1900 hours on November 2nd. Total transit time from U-559s sinking to arrival at Bletchley Park, 93 hours, just under 4 days. In 1942, with wartime restrictions, contested airspace, and the need for absolute secrecy, this represented extraordinary speed. Meanwhile, the 38 German prisoners from U-559 were being interrogated at Alexandria. British intelligence officers asked detailed questions about the submarine's patrol history, weapons systems, and crew morale. They deliberately avoided any questions about communications equipment or cryptographic procedures. The Germans were encouraged to believe that British interest focused on tactical intelligence, patrol routes, minefields, convoy observations, not on Enigma. On November 4, 1942, the sealed leather cases arrived at Hut 8, Bletchley Park's Naval Enigma section. Cryptanalyst Hugh Alexander opened them personally. Inside were the materials that Tony Fasson and Colin Grazier had died retrieving. The battle to break Shark, the code that had blinded British naval intelligence for 10 months, was about to begin. The materials from U-559 arrived at Bletchley Park on November 4, 1942, 5 days after Fasson and Grazier died retrieving them. The package was delivered directly to Hut 8, the section responsible for breaking German naval Enigma. Cryptanalyst Hugh Alexander opened the waterproof containers personally. What Alexander found inside was beyond expectations. The Wetterkurzschlüssel was intact, all pages legible despite seawater exposure. The Kurzsignalheft was complete through December 1942. The Enigma key sheets provided settings through November 30th. And the M4 machine itself, though damaged by seawater, revealed the physical construction of the fourth rotor that had mystified British cryptanalysts for 10 months. The fourth rotor, designated Beta or Gamma, depending on configuration, added 26 additional positions to the Enigma's encryption possibilities. Standard three-rotor Enigma had 158,962, 555, 217,126, 360,000 possible settings. The M4 variant increased this to approximately 4.2 x 1021 possible configurations. The statistical attack methods that had worked against three-rotor machines were computationally impossible against M4, at least without cribs. The U-559 materials provided those cribs. The weather codebook was particularly valuable. German U-boats transmitted standardized weather reports at predictable intervals using compressed abbreviations. These reports followed rigid formats: wind direction, wind speed, sea state, visibility, barometric pressure. Bletchley Park now knew the exact German phrases used in these reports and could guess probable message content. This was the breakthrough they needed. Cryptanalysts could use known plaintext, the weather terminology from the Kurzsignalheft, to generate cribs, probable word positions within encrypted messages. With cribs, they could employ bomber machines, electromechanical computers designed by Alan Turing, to test rotor positions until finding configurations that produced the known plaintext. The process was still brutally difficult. Each weather report crib had to be positioned correctly within the encrypted message. The fourth rotor added complexity that required modified bomb machines. The four-rotor bombs weren't yet operational in November 1942. But the current key sheets from U-559 gave them a shortcut. They already knew November's rotor settings. No guessing required. Just decrypt. On November 24, 1942, 25 days after Fasson and Grazier died, WWII cryptanalysts successfully decrypted their first shark message in 10 months. The blackout was over, but the real test would come in December when the captured key sheets expired. Could Bletchley Park maintain access to shark, using only the codebooks and cribs without pre-known settings? The answer arrived on December 13, 1942. Using weather report cribs derived from the Wetterkurzschlüssel, combined with modified crib testing procedures, cryptanalysts broke December's shark settings. From December 13th forward, Bletchley Park maintained continuous access to German U-boat communications for the remainder of the war. The 10-month blackout never returned. The materials from U-559 had provided not just temporary access, but the permanent methodology to break shark operationally. The mathematical impact was staggering. Prior to February 1942, WWII had been decrypting approximately 80% of intercepted U-boat messages within 24 to 48 hours of transmission. During the blackout, February-December 1942, that percentage dropped to 0. After December 13th, decryption rates climbed back to 75% within 48 hours by March 1943. The operational advantage was equally dramatic. With access to U-boat communications restored, British Admiralty could track Wolfpack positions, convoy interception plans, and refueling rendezvous locations. Atlantic convoy routing officers could steer ships around known submarine concentrations. Air patrols could be directed to precise coordinates where U-boats were surfacing to recharge batteries. The technology Fasson and Grazier died to capture, 3 codebooks and 1 Enigma machine, had broken the deadlock. But they would never know it. Both men were posthumously awarded the George Cross, Britain's highest civilian decoration for gallantry. Tommy Brown, who survived, received the George Medal. The awards were announced publicly on September 14, 1943, but the citation made no mention of Enigma or cryptography. As far as the public knew, they had simply captured important documents from an enemy submarine. The truth, that their sacrifice had restored Britain's ability to read German U-boat communications and would directly contribute to Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic, remained classified until the 1970s. The restoration of shark decryption capability on December 13, 1942, translated into measurable maritime outcomes within weeks. The statistical record of the Battle of the Atlantic tells the story in brutal arithmetic. In November 1942, the month before Bletchley Park broke back into shark, Allied convoy losses reached 729,160 gross register tons, 119 merchant ships sunk, 807 Allied merchant sailors killed. The U-boat fleet, operating with near-total communications security, positioned wolf packs along convoy routes with lethal efficiency. British convoy routing officers, blind to German intentions, could only guess where submarines were concentrating. December 1942 saw immediate improvement. Allied losses dropped to 262,135 tons, a 64% reduction from November. 60 merchant ships sunk. This decline occurred during the first 2 weeks that Bletchley Park had intermittent shark access, December 13-31. Convoy routing officers could now identify high-threat zones and redirect merchant ships around wolf pack concentrations. January 1943 produced further decline. 261,359 tons lost, 37 ships sunk. February 1943, 403,062 tons, 63 ships. March 1943, historically the peak month for U-boat operations, saw 627,277 tons lost, but this represented the final surge of an offensive that was already compromised. German commanders didn't know it yet, but every operational message they transmitted was being read at Bletchley Park within 24-48 hours. The turning point came in April 1943. Allied losses plummeted to 344,680 tons, 56 ships. May 1943 brought catastrophic reversal for the Kriegsmarine, only 264,852 tons lost, but 41 U-boats sunk. The hunter had become the hunted. Allied escort groups, directed by ultra-intelligence, the code word for Enigma-derived information, began systematically destroying German submarines faster than shipyards could replace them. The production arithmetic was devastating. German shipyards in 1943 produced approximately 270 Type 7 and Type 9 U-boats, an average of 22.5 submarines per month. In May 1943 alone, the Kriegsmarine lost 41 boats. June, 17 lost. July, 37 lost. August, 25 lost. Attrition exceeded replacement. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of U-boat operations, was losing submarines and crews at unsustainable rates. The human cost was equally stark. In 1942, when Shark was largely unreadable, U-boats sank 1,664 Allied merchant ships, totaling 7,790,687 gross register tons. In 1943, with Shark fully compromised, U-boats sank 812 ships, totaling 3,611,641 tons, a 54% reduction in tonnage lost. Approximately 15,000 Allied merchant sailors who would have died in 1943 survived because their convoys were routed away from wolf packs that Bletchley Park had located via decrypted messages. The U-boat casualty rate told the mirror story. In 1942, Germany lost 87 U-boats. 6% of sorties resulted in submarine loss. In 1943, Germany lost 244 U-boats, 15% loss rate per sortie. By 1944, loss rates reached 23%. U-boat duty became a near-certain death sentence. Of 39,000 German submariners who served during the war, 28,000 died, a 72% fatality rate, the highest of any military service in any nation during WWII. The strategic calculus was inescapable. Germany needed to sink approximately 700,000 tons of Allied shipping per month to offset new construction and slowly strangle Britain's supply lines. After December 1942, monthly sinkings never again reached that threshold. Britain's food imports, which had dropped to dangerously low levels during the Shark blackout, stabilized and then increased throughout 1943. The petroleum equation was equally critical. Britain in 1942 imported 11.4 million tons of oil, barely sufficient for military operations and civilian needs. In 1943, imports rose to 13.8 million tons. In 1944, 20.7 million tons. The fuel that powered RAF bombers over Germany, Royal Navy operations in the Mediterranean, and the massive D-Day invasion fleet in June 1944 arrived via Atlantic convoys that were routed around U-boat concentrations identified through Shark decrypts. The materials that Tony Fasson and Colin Grazier died retrieving on October 30th, 1942, enabled this entire strategic reversal. Without the Wetterkurzschlüssel codebook, Bletchley Park would have lacked the cribs necessary to break Shark operationally. Without the current key sheets, the December breakthrough would have been delayed, possibly by months. Without the Enigma M4 machine, British engineers couldn't have designed the four-rotor bombs that made sustained decryption possible. Every one of the 15,000 Allied merchant sailors who survived 1943, every ton of food and fuel that reached Britain, every bomber that flew from British airfields toward Germany, all depended on the 17 minutes that Fasson, Grazier and Brown spent inside a sinking submarine pulling waterproof document cases from flooded compartments. The mathematics were brutal in their clarity, 2 lives traded for thousands saved. 2 men drowned in darkness for hundreds of ships spared. A 16-year-old canteen assistant and 2 career naval officers descending into a flooding submarine because they understood, in that moment, that the papers inside were worth dying for. They were right. The numbers were staggering, and they painted an undeniable picture of how much Tony Fasson and Colin Grazier's sacrifice changed the war. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the cryptographic side of WWII, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We release new analysis videos every week. And drop a comment. What aspect of WWII history fascinates you most? The technology, the strategy, the human stories? I read every comment. The immediate aftermath of U-559's sinking created a classification paradox. Tony Fasson and Colin Grazier had performed an act of extraordinary courage that directly altered the course of the war. But their nation couldn't publicly acknowledge what they had accomplished. On November 7, 1942, HMS Petard's commanding officer, Commander Mark Thornton, submitted his after-action report to Mediterranean Fleet Headquarters. The report described the depth charge attack, U-559's forced surfacing, and the boarding action. It named Fasson, Grazier and Brown as the men who entered the submarine. It noted that valuable documents were recovered before the vessel sank. The report was immediately classified Most Secret, the highest British security designation. Copies went to Admiralty intelligence sections, but not to historical records offices or press liaisons. The families of Fasson and Grazier received standard notification that their sons had died in action against the enemy, with no additional details provided. In January 1943, senior officers at Admiralty recommended Fasson and Grazier for gallantry recognition. The problem was crafting a citation that honored their sacrifice without revealing what they had actually accomplished. Mentioning Enigma was impossible. German forces still didn't know that Shark had been compromised. Describing the specific documents recovered would alert enemy intelligence that Britain had captured current cryptographic materials. The solution was bureaucratic vagueness. The citation, when finally published in the London Gazette on September 14, 1943, stated that Lieutenant Fasson and able Seaman Grazier lost their lives in an attempt to recover important documents from a sinking enemy submarine. The award's George Cross, posthumous for both men. Tommy Brown received the George Medal. The citations were accurate, but deliberately incomplete. This incomplete recognition created a painful irony. Fasson and Grazier received Britain's highest civilian gallantry decoration, yet their families were never told what important documents meant. Fasson's mother, Christina Fasson, attended a private ceremony at Buckingham Palace where King George VI presented the George Cross. She knew her son had died heroically. She didn't know he had helped break Enigma and save thousands of Allied lives. The same pattern extended to Bletchley Park's cryptanalysts. Hugh Alexander, who led the shark-breaking effort in Hut 8, understood exactly what the U-559 materials meant. He personally drafted a memo to Admiralty Intelligence in December 1942, stating that the material captured from U-559 has proven invaluable and has directly enabled our current success against the four-rotor cipher. This memo was filed in classified records and not declassified until 1996. Within Hut 8, a small plaque was placed on the wall acknowledging Fasson and Grazier's contribution. The plaque identified them by name and noted they had died securing materials essential to breaking naval Enigma. This memorial was visible only to personnel with ultra-clearance, perhaps 200 people total. It remained classified until Bletchley Park became a museum in the 1990s. The broader British public learned nothing. This secrecy extended for decades. The first public acknowledgement that Enigma had been broken came in 1974, when Group Captain F.W. Winterbotham published the ultra-secret. Winterbotham's book revealed that Britain had read German encrypted communications throughout the war. But even Winterbotham didn't know the full U-559 story. His book doesn't mention Fasson, Grazier, or the October 1942 capture. The complete truth emerged slowly through the 1980s and 1990s as Bletchley Park records were progressively declassified. By 2000, historians had assembled the full narrative. U-559's capture provided the critical breakthrough that ended the shark blackout and enabled Allied victory in the Atlantic. By then, Tony Fasson had been dead for 58 years, Colin Grazier for 58 years. Tommy Brown, who survived U-559 only to die in a house fire in 1945 at age 19, had been dead for 55 years. None of them ever knew the full impact of what they accomplished on October 30, 1942. The silence around their achievement wasn't malicious. It was operational necessity. But it created a historical injustice. Two men who altered the trajectory of World War II received recognition for capturing important documents, rather than for breaking the code that helped win the Battle of the Atlantic. The operational impact of restored shark access manifested across every aspect of the Atlantic campaign from December 1942 forward. The war that Fasson and Grazier influenced, though neither lived to see it, played out exactly as the intelligence advantage would predict. Convoy HX-229 and SC-122, sailing in March 1943, illustrated both the power and limitations of ultra-intelligence. Bletchley Park decrypted German messages revealing that 38 U-boats were concentrating in the Black Pit, the mid-Atlantic air gap beyond range of land-based aircraft. British convoy routing officers attempted to steer both convoys around the Wolfpack. Weather and navigation errors brought the convoys directly through the concentration anyway, resulting in 21 ships sunk. However, post-action analysis determined that without ultra-intelligence directing escort reinforcements to the area, losses would have exceeded 35 ships. Cryptographic advantage had reduced casualties by 40%, even in the worst-case scenario. The Bay of Biscay offensive in summer 1943 demonstrated Ultra's offensive potential. Decrypted shark messages revealed that U-boats transiting from French bases to Atlantic patrol zones crossed the Bay of Biscay on predictable routes. RAF Coastal Command deployed long-range aircraft, Sunderlands, Liberators, and Halifaxes to patrol coordinates identified through Enigma decrypts. Between June and August 1943, Allied aircraft sank 28 U-boats in the Bay of Biscay, crippled 15 others, and forced Admiral Dönitz to order submarines to transit submerged during daylight, dramatically increasing passage time and reducing operational efficiency. The Wolfpack tactic itself became untenable once Shark was compromised. German operational doctrine relied on U-boats transmitting frequent position reports so headquarters could coordinate attacks on identified convoys. Each transmission gave Bletchley Park opportunities to decrypt messages and locate submarines. By mid-1943, Dönitz faced an impossible paradox. Coordinated Wolfpack operations required radio communications, but radio communications revealed Wolfpack positions to Allied direction finding and cryptanalysis. The tactic that had nearly won the Atlantic campaign in 1942 became a liability in 1943. The supply submarine program, Type 14 Milchkuh, milk cow boats designed to refuel attack submarines at sea, collapsed under ultra-targeting. Germany built only 10 Type 14 boats total. Between June and August 1943, Allied forces sank 5 of them by intercepting refueling rendezvous coordinates from decrypted messages. By October 1943, all but one Type 14 had been destroyed. U-boats could no longer conduct extended Atlantic patrols. Operational range dropped from 90 days to 45 days, halving effective submarine presence in the convoy routes. The introduction of the acoustic torpedo, T5 Zaunkönig, in September 1943 represented Germany's attempt to regain tactical advantage. The T5 homed on propeller noise, targeting escort vessels. Dönitz believed it would force Allied destroyers to stay clear of U-boats, reducing the defensive perimeter around convoys. But Bletchley Park decrypted the technical specifications and tactical employment instructions before the first T-5 was fired in combat. British scientists developed the Foxer, a noise-making decoy towed behind ships to divert acoustic torpedoes, and deployed it fleet-wide within 6 weeks of the T-5's introduction. A weapon that should have restored U-boat effectiveness was neutralized before achieving strategic impact. The human cost of this intelligence advantage was measured in U-boat crews. In 1942, a German submariner had a 70% probability of surviving a 2-year service period. By 1944, survival probability had dropped to 15%. Experienced commanders, the elite who had survived multiple patrols, were systematically killed. By late 1943, the average U-boat commander had completed only 1.2 combat patrols before his boat was sunk. The institutional knowledge that made U-boats lethal in 1941-42 was being destroyed faster than training schools could replace it. The materials from U-559 didn't just break a code, they broke a strategy. Germany's plan to strangle Britain through submarine blockade required operational security. Once that security was compromised, once every U-boat position, every patrol plan, every rendezvous coordinate was being read at Bletchley Park, the strategic foundation of the Atlantic campaign collapsed. Tony Fasson and Colin Grazier entered U-559 on October 30, 1942. By October 30, 1943, 1 year later, the Battle of the Atlantic was effectively over. Germany would continue U-boat operations until May 1945, but as an attritional nuisance rather than a strategic threat. The decision point came on that single night, when 2 men descended into a flooding submarine and refused to leave without the documents they knew could change the war. They were right, and it cost them everything. When Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945, Allied intelligence teams swept through Kriegsmarine headquarters in Flensburg and Berlin, seizing records of U-boat operations, production statistics, and communications logs. The archive, millions of pages, was shipped to Britain and the United States for analysis. Historians spent decades cross-referencing German records with Allied operational files to reconstruct the complete picture of the Atlantic campaign. The numbers validated everything that Bletchley Park's cryptanalysts had understood in real time. German production records showed that Kriegsmarine commissioned 1,162 U-boats during the war. 785 were sunk by Allied action. 175 were scuttled by their crews at war's end. Only 156 survived to surrender. The U-boat force sustained a 67% casualty rate among boats and a 72% casualty rate among personnel, the highest loss rates of any military service in WWII. Interrogation of captured German intelligence officers revealed that Kriegsmarine cryptographers never suspected that Enigma M4 had been compromised. They attributed Allied convoy routing success to direction finding, aerial reconnaissance, and radar, all technologies Germany knew existed. The possibility that Britain was reading encrypted U-boat communications was considered and explicitly dismissed as technically impossible, given the mathematical security of the four-rotor system. Admiral Karl Dönitz, interrogated extensively in 1945, stated that he had personally reviewed Enigma security in 1943 when U-boat losses began accelerating. His cryptographic staff assured him that M4 remained unbreakable. Dönitz concluded that improved Allied radar and long-range patrol aircraft explained the losses. He never knew that every operational order he transmitted was being read by his enemies. Post-war analysis calculated that ultra-intelligence, predominantly derived from shark decrypts, shortened the Battle of the Atlantic by 1-2 years. British official historian Harry Hinsley estimated that without Enigma breaks, Britain would have required an additional 250,000 tons of merchant shipping per month to compensate for higher U-boat effectiveness. That tonnage didn't exist. The alternative would have been rationing reductions that approached starvation levels and delayed the Normandy invasion by 12 to 18 months. The specific contribution of the U-559 materials was precisely documented. The Wetterkurzschlüssel codebook, captured on October 30, 1942, remained operationally useful through June 1943, providing cribs for 8 months. The Kurzsignalheft stayed in Hut 8's reference library through 1944. The Enigma M4 machine became the prototype for British four-rotor bomb construction, enabling the mechanized cryptanalysis that sustained shark breaks for the remainder of the war. Tony Fasson's personnel file, declassified in 1995, contained a memo from Hugh Alexander dated December 1942. The final sentence read, "Lieutenant Fasson's courage has contributed directly to saving thousands of Allied lives. His sacrifice may prove one of the most strategically significant individual actions of the war." Fasson never read it. Neither did his family, until 1995, 53 years after his death. The historical record proved Tony Fasson and Colin Grazier right in every detail. If this kind of detailed cryptographic history interests you, you'll love our other videos analyzing WWII intelligence and code-breaking operations. Check out the playlist in the description. And before we wrap up with the bigger lesson here, hit that like button if you appreciate this level of research and detail in history content. The story of U-559, Tony Fasson, Colin Grazier and Tommy Brown, is not simply a tale of individual heroism. It's a case study in how technological wars are won by men willing to risk everything in moments of absolute clarity. Fasson and Grazier weren't cryptanalysts. They didn't understand Enigma rotors or bomb machines. They had no technical knowledge of four-rotor encryption systems. What they understood was simpler and more profound. Inside that sinking submarine were documents that could change the war, and retrieving them was worth dying for. They were correct, and they paid the ultimate price for that correctness. Their story parallels other critical intelligence captures during WWII. The capture of U-110 in May 1941, which provided the first three-rotor naval Enigma machine, the theft of Japanese codebooks from the consulate in New York before Pearl Harbor, the Soviet acquisition of German cipher materials during the Battle of Stalingrad. In each case, individual decisions made under extreme pressure, often by men who would not survive to see the outcome, altered the strategic balance of the war. The pattern is consistent. Technological advantage in modern war depends not only on machines and mathematics, but on human judgment in chaotic moments. Fasson had seconds to decide whether to board U-559. He chose correctly. Grazier had seconds to decide whether to follow him down. He chose correctly. Both men had seconds to decide whether to abandon the submarine when it began its final plunge. They chose to stay and retrieve one more document. That choice killed them and helped win the Battle of the Atlantic. The broader lesson transcends WWII. Every technological competition, whether military, economic, or scientific, eventually comes down to individuals making irrevocable decisions with incomplete information under time pressure. Fasson didn't know that Shark had blinded Bletchley Park for 10 months. He didn't know that Allied convoy losses had reached crisis levels. He didn't know that the codebooks he was retrieving would enable cryptanalytic breakthroughs that would save 15,000 Allied sailors. He simply knew, these documents matter, and someone has to get them. He got them. Colin Grazier got them. Tommy Brown got them to the surface. Down 70 miles off the Egyptian coast, in darkness in rising water, in a submarine sinking toward the bottom, 2 men drowned clutching waterproof document cases that would help win the war. October 30th, 1942. 21:57 hours. U-559 slips beneath the Mediterranean and takes Tony Fasson and Colin Grazier with her. On the surface, Tommy Brown treads water, holding an Enigma machine above the waves. In his other hand, a codebook that will break Shark and save thousands of lives. 17 minutes, 2 lives, 1 submarine, victory. Thank you for watching this deep dive into one of World War II's most critical intelligence operations. The courage of Tony Fasson, Colin Grazier and Tommy Brown reminds us that history's turning points often come down to individual decisions made in moments of extraordinary pressure. If you found this story compelling, I've got another fascinating WWII analysis ready for you on screen right now. Click to continue exploring the untold technical stories that shaped the war. See you in the next one.